So up on your feet, up on your feet. Kevin.
Thank you. So this is the elephant in the room. And today, that elephant represents the traditional top-down, bureaucratic, power to the center leadership approach. And in the heyday of the circus, the elephant was always in the opening act and the closing act. So we're gonna just set the elephant here. So I'm from Maine, the state of Maine, and when I was given the opportunity to come here, I leaped at it. I was super excited. There are two things here that I love a lot. The first is this place on earth. I love this part of the country. And the second is that I love the mission of this conference. And when I tell you a bit more about my story, I think you'll understand why. So let's jump right in. It was the day before Halloween, October 2012, and I, a lumber company executive from Maine, found myself standing alone at the Wounded Knee Massacre site on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in the southwest corner of South Dakota. Some time passed and a well-worn car pulled up and a lovely old jewelry maker rolled down her window and with a grand smile said, "Hello, what brings you here?" Which has since become one of my favorite questions in life that we can ask ourselves anywhere, anytime. I reciprocated her smile, I extended my hand, we shook, and I said, "That is a great question." It was such a great question that it would take me at the time 3 more years and 6 more trips to that remote reservation before I felt I knew the answer. All I knew at the time was that I was searching, which is something I've since come to believe is universally human. I was searching for my voice in a community that did not feel heard. We all adhere to a belief system, otherwise we don't have a strategy for dealing with the world. So I want to give you a quick sense of where my belief system came from. So it starts with the year 1848, which is the year Hancock lumber began. Our company has been in business since before the Civil War, and I'm part of the 6th generation of my family to work there. We grow, thank you. We grow trees. We manufacture lumber that we distribute all over the world, and then in Maine and New Hampshire, we sell a full line of building materials to contractors and professional builders, and we have 550 people who are a part of our team. In 2007, as you may recall, the national housing and mortgage markets collapsed. In the 3 years that followed, housing starts in Maine fell by 66%, and our sales in 36 months fell by 50%, essentially without losing a customer. We were working with all the same builders before as after. The market had just gotten that much smaller. In 2010, at the peak of the collapse, unconnected to me at the time, but totally connected now, I began to have trouble speaking. So when I would go to talk, all the muscles in my throat would spasm and squeeze and contract, and my voice could get very strained and broken and choppy and sometimes hard to hear. And after months of going to doctors, I was finally diagnosed with a rare neurological voice disorder that I'd never heard of called spasmodic dysphonia, which has no known cause, but I know the cause, and no known cure. And I am curing myself. You can tell I have a bit of a disorder, but if you could have heard me a year ago or 2 or 3, it was 100 times more difficult. But that's another story for another day. But at work, it really scared me. I laugh about this now, but at the time I was like, well, what good possibly could a CEO be who can't talk all the time? And at first, I was not in pursuit of any kind of management revolution. I was just trying to take care of my broken voice. And it's really simple. When it's hard to talk, you talk less. You learn strategies to talk less. And my favorite strategy that I developed was simply to answer a question with a question. Just reverse this conversation and put it back on the other person. So at work, only initially to protect my voice, I would start doing that. Someone would come up to me because I'm the CEO of the company with a question or a problem. And I would listen to the question or the problem and then say, geez, that is a great question. What do you think we should do about it? And then he or she would tell me what he or she thought. And then if it made sense at all, which it always did, this is the beauty of it, it always did, I then simply said, that sounds good, let's go do that. And off he or she would go with his or her solution to his or her problem. And while originally I was simply trying to protect my voice, in time I caught on to something beautiful. People already knew what to do. They did not need a CEO-centric solution to the problems they saw. They knew more about that issue than I did. All they needed was some confidence and some encouragement and a safe zone to trust their instincts and follow their voice. 2012, the economy had stabilized, and I could see that my community, our tribe, was gonna be okay. And I had this growing feeling that I tried to fight, coming from the rugged individualism of Maine, which I think is similar to what you experience here. That growing feeling was I needed to serve myself a bit more. I needed to regain my balance, search for my voice, and I didn't know how I was going to do that. I just had the feeling. In August of 2012, I was at the Jetport in Portland, Maine. I picked up a copy of National Geographic, and the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation was on the cover. And the title read, "In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, the Rebirth of a Sioux Nation." And I read that article before the plane ever took off, and this has never happened to me before or since. It was as if every character ever a part of that story came out of that yellow magazine and gave me this giant hug. And I finished, and I tapped my wife on the knee, and I said, I'm gonna go there. I wanna see what life is like for the people who live there. Today, I've been there a total of 19 times, and this afternoon I'm heading back again for the 20th. And one of the things I really like to emphasize, because Pine Ridge is a place traditionally where people like me have gone to help fix or save the people who are there. But I go there because the people there and the culture there and the landscape there gives power to me, that they have so much to share with the world. And people ask me often what I do there, and I used to struggle with the answer, but I've become quite comfortable with it. I don't actually do anything there. I just hang out with the people who live there. I don't try to change anything. I don't try to fix anything. I don't try to solve anything. And I've come to believe that the simple act of awareness and connectivity in and of itself is powerful. So I took away from those experiences 5 learnings. 1, from SD, I actually understood what it was like to not feel heard. At Pine Ridge, I came to see that there are actually lots of ways people lose their voice in this world. And I ended up concluding even that from my frame of reference, the very purpose of a life on earth was for an individual to find his or her own voice, to know it, to own it, and to bring it forth, and to share it with the world unabashed. But that, unfortunately, throughout history, leaders have probably often done more to restrict, limit, and inhibit the voices of others than to free and liberate them. And then finally it dawned on me that the partial loss of my own voice, which I'd only ever previously thought of as a hindrance, was actually a gift and a blessing and an invitation, because I was in a position of leadership to do what I could to help strengthen the voices of others, especially those who don't always feel heard. So I'm going to take a quick pause here, because this is where I stay when I go to Pine Ridge. There are no hotels on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. There's one motel. But I stay at the Singing Horse Trading Post, and one of my favorite business leaders who will never make headlines is actually here today. She's the proprietor of the Trading Post. Her name is Rosie Freer, and I would just like you to stand up and give a wave, Rosie. And her story is amazing. Rosie is from Germany, but has now spent almost 3 decades, her entire adult life at Pine Ridge, most of that life running a business in a place where it is super difficult to run one. And the only American context she ever had for running a business was within the Lakota culture, where anything that was acquired was shared with everyone. On a buffalo hunt, everyone participated and everyone ate. So before Rosie ever would have heard of the phrase conscious capitalism, she was practicing it. And I asked her, this was so lovely, I asked her at the end of the session yesterday what she thought of the great program. And I cannot capture this, I'm sure, in the beauty with which she gave it, but because it was meant as a loving compliment and then a little, come on, let's go. I said, what do you think of this conscious capitalism? And she paused and she said, well, what took you so long? And I had looked real closely at Lakota culture and thought I had seen from things I'd been taught and shared some clues as well. I was really interested in learning about how Lakota society was organized before and then after the reservation era. And this is only my perception. It's not meant to be right or wrong. It's just what I experienced. But before the reservation era, one thing that really jumped out at me was the capital was super small, like you couldn't find it. The Great Father in Washington would send negotiators onto the plains to make treaties with the tribes. And those negotiators would show up and say, "Take me to your leader." Nobody actually knew what that meant in the traditional sense of the term, because everybody led, and no one spoke for everyone. And if you look at the core values of the Sioux, they're really about individual choice, individual responsibility, power dispersal, conscious capitalism. And it was so cool to be able to glimpse that. And so then I spent a couple years trying to get my head around all of this, and I was doing some work actually on the Navajo reservation, and one night after I had headed down towards Phoenix to go home, I was walking in the desert at sunset, and it hit me. These 5 words came to me, not from within me. They came like to me, and they were so powerful in their simplicity. In nature, power is dispersed. I paused at that desert scene at sunset, and I looked around and I said to myself, where is the headquarters of this desert? Which one of these cactus is in charge of all the other cactus? Where's the capital? Where's the CEO? Where's the foreman? Where's the president? And of course, you can't find them in nature, because the sacred power of nature lives in every single part of nature. And because we are coming back to the understanding that humans are not above nature, they are part of nature, this is ultimately how humans want to self-organize. And this is the power behind the movement that's represented at this conference. But that's not the way business has been done. That's not the way organizations have been run. For centuries, the planet's social institutions, family, school, place of worship, place of work, seat of government, have spun a different narrative, suggesting that power lives out there, away from you, in someone else's hands. And so how's that going in the 21st century? And we'll look at work as an example because it's what brought us here. It's not going very well. These are terrible statistics, and it's not okay. And that's what's really changing. It's no longer okay. People were aware of this decades ago, but the idea was, well, you sacrificed at work so you can live on the weekends and in retirement. But it's no longer okay. And people often talk about the economic cost of disengagement, but what I am really drawn to is the social human cost. 2 billion people work. And they work for decades, and they work long weeks, and to have that gigantic chunk of time be unrewarding is not okay, as you know, which is what brings you here. So in my frame of reference, why is the engagement so low? To me, it became super simple. It's because people at work don't feel authentically heard. And then this got me thinking about some things I never thought I'd be thinking about in a lumber company office in a small town west of Portland, Maine. Like, what even is the purpose of work in the 21st century? You know, there's been a lot of great talk at this conference about purpose, but it's important to take that purpose all the way back to the beginning. Like, what the heck is the purpose of work to begin with in the 21st century? And I think it's simple. Work should enhance the lives of the people who do it. That should be the first purpose of work. So that brought me to an even more impossible question, which is, if the work is supposed to enhance the life of the people who do it, you've then got to think about what's the purpose of life. And of course, I can't answer that question with any certainty, but in my heart and from my paradigm, it became quite clear. The purpose of life, of a life, is to self-actualize. It's for an individual to come into his or her authentic, never to be repeated voice, and to be loved and respected exactly as you are, where you are. And so that should become the purpose of work, even at a lumber company. That should become the purpose of work, to help people find their voice and self-actualize, which is where I got really excited about this idea of creating an employee-centric company. And to me, that's a place where organizational excellence becomes an outcome of individuals thriving through a culture of exceptional engagement. And I think that work can become the primary place, or a primary place, where adults self-actualize. And think about all the things that could change the world. I haven't thought of anything more powerful than helping every individual find and release their voice. But today, in big part, was about implementation. So now this is where our work skills have to come into play, because you have an idea, but now we've got to actually be able to embed it in the very core of an organization, which we've been working at Hancock Lumber now for the better part of this decade trying to do. And what we realized when we set out to do that was that 5 things needed to change: the mission, the metrics, the processes, the leaders, which is really not the leaders had to leave, they had to change how they led, and then the culture had to change. So I remember the first time I talked about this, I was sweating. I was so nervous. I was in Falmouth, Maine, standing in front of a room full of contractors, big customers of our company, and I took a deep breath and I said to them, you know the old saying, the customer comes first? I don't actually think that's true. And I was nervous when I said it. So I qualified it. I think the people who are going to take care of the customer come first. And that if we nail that, no pun intended, they will take exceptional care of the customer. So what we say at Hancock Lumber now is that the customer comes, this is a Maine slang term, the customer comes a wicked close second. So then we needed a new metric, and that metric was simple. It was employee engagement. And so we use the Best Places to Work annual third-party confidential survey to measure every year the engagement of the employees within the company as defined by them. And we've made for our managers this the top metric. This is the number one metric that leaders at Hancock Lumber are responsible for facilitating. And in a world where the average now is 34%, last year at Hancock Lumber, at a lumber company in Maine, it was 89% of the people who worked at the company defined themselves confidentially as being highly engaged in the work that they do. And that survey is wonderful because it lays out questions that focus on the people who work at the company. And the goal is to create authentic dialogue about the work experience as defined by the people that are working here, not by me or the other leaders. And the key to facilitating that is to make it safe for people to actually say what they think. And the key to facilitating that is leadership restraint. We've taught ourselves at Hancock Lumber to essentially not feel the need to respond to what somebody says other than to affirm we heard it and to thank them for sharing it. People don't need to be corrected. And people aren't right or wrong. They're just expressing what they're experiencing at that particular moment in their life. And this led us to a new set of processes, which I call the answer to the test. It's like so simple, it's not fair. So every year we take the survey, we get great data, we take some time to analyze the data and compare this year's results to past results. We identify answers we want to celebrate and opportunities to improve. And we sit down with huddle groups in a safe zone, and we ask the people on the team in the huddle to help talk about what might make that issue better. And I call that moment the answers to the test. Because they know, and they'll share it, and that turns into initiatives, and then we come back to the huddle group, and we check in again and say, is that helping? And it is just such a simple, iterative process that is totally driven by making the voice of the employees strong. And this creates a bunch of new leadership skills that are to some degree quite different maybe than the traditional skills. And then finally, that really produces, or it brings me to culture. We used to have at our company sweatshirts that said, "Our people make the difference." You've probably heard or seen that line before. And I hope you know by now that I'm a big lover of humanity and people, but I don't actually think that statement's true. I think culture makes the difference, and I think great people are actually everywhere. If there are 7 billion people on this planet, I think there are darn close to 7 billion super amazing people. The planet's filled with amazing people. It's culture that makes the difference, and if you look at history, it plays this out. Take Germany after World War II. Arbitrarily divided between East and West. One side of that line went on to lead the planet forward post-war. The other side of that line held on as long as it could with barbed wire, guard dogs, and machine guns until it collapsed under its own weight. But what do you think the difference really was? Do you think randomly on that day as the Russians raced east and the Americans raced west, and they created a line that no one could have planned on, that all of the quote-unquote great Germans were randomly on one side of it, and the quote-unquote, I don't know what you'd even say, not great Germans were on the other? Of course not. That country was filled with amazing people on both sides of that line. What ended up making the difference? Culture. Who drove the culture? Leaders. The culture either dispersed power or it collected it. And you can see this time and time again, North Korea and South Korea, completely random line. The economic output of South Korea today is like 40 times that of North Korea. But it's not because all the good Koreans happen to be in the South. Korea is filled with great people top to bottom. It's the culture that makes the difference. So these, after being at this for 7 years, are some of the outcomes we've experienced. But this is my favorite. And unemployment in Maine right now, I think, is 3.4%. And with 550 positions, right now we have 3 openings. And that number has never gotten to 10. And it's my favorite metric. So I think in summary, staying in your lane, and we've heard this a lot in the last couple days, is actually really bad advice for business in the 21st century. What we need to do is just the opposite, which is get out of our lane and flip that age-old script, which is very flippable, and the time is right. And so back to the elephant. So on May, I think it was May 5th, 2017, I went to the dilapidated Dunkin' Donut Center in Providence, Rhode Island to watch the last ever show of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, the greatest show on earth. I thought it was a super historic moment. And at the heart of that moment is the essence of what brings us here together today. The elephant that helped make the circus, the star of the show, became the very same icon that helped bring the circus down. But what changed? Not the elephant. It was human perception of what was and what was not okay that changed. And think about the power of this. By 2017, I think that show had 6 or 8 elephants. The well-being of, call it 6 elephants had become socially more important than an entire iconic industry, the circus. And that's the moment of opportunity that we live in, and that's the power of change. The moment of change is upon us, and I'm just super, super happy to be alive, leading a company, helping to lead a company, having learned a few of these lessons in a way I never saw coming, and to be able to come and share it with you today is a real blessing. So love to all of you, and thank you so much.